Hi, everyone, and welcome. This is a special Yahoo News live stream. He was labeled a long shot when he entered his bid for the White House back in April, but these days, the lexicon to describe Senator Bernie Sanders seems to be expanding, and it includes words like threat and contender. Senator Sanders, thanks so much for being here. Nice to have you.
Nice to be with you, Katie.
So listen, it's especially nice to have you on a day where you're getting some very positive press from places like the Washington Post and the New York Times. They're saying you're having a moment. The New York Times says challenging Hillary Clinton, Bernie Sanders gains momentum in Iowa. The Washington Post said it's not just Hillary. Senator Bernie Sanders is outdrawing Martin O'Malley. The Washington Post describes it as Bernie mentum. So are you feeling the big mo? I mean, why do you think your candidacy is resonating?
Well, let me tell you, it's been a heck of a week. We formally announced in my hometown of Burlington, Vermont, on a beautiful evening, over 5,000 people in my hometown came out. And that was very gratifying. Then we went to New Hampshire. We had only standing room crowds. We had over 700 people in Portsmouth. Then we went to Iowa, and it really became crazy. I mean, just huge crowds. And we ended up Sunday morning in Minneapolis. 4,000 people came out. And I think the reason for that is that people are just having enough with the status quo from an economic perspective and a political perspective. They see the rich getting much richer and everybody else hurting, and they want people to start standing up for the middle class.
You were polling at 8%, I think, in April, and now you're up to 15%, which is pretty, a big jump. And yes. I think a lot of people are pretty surprised about it.
Well, they may be. I'm not. Because people understand, Katie, that there is something fundamentally wrong when for the last 40 years, the middle class of this country has been disappearing. We got millions of people out there. They're working longer hours for lower wages. In my state of Vermont, honestly, it is not uncommon for people to be working 2 or 3 jobs to cobble together an income and some health care. Young people can't afford to go to college anymore. We're not dealing with the issue of a corrupt campaign finance system. We're in the moment now. You want to run for president of the United States? Well, you better get some billionaires behind you. And if you don't have billionaires, it's pretty hard to run.
We're going to talk about all those things, campaign finance reform and other matters. But a lot of people didn't take your candidacy seriously initially when you announced, and witnessed this piece of business on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart, and then we'll talk about it.
Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders kicked off his campaign for president.
He's a long shot.
A long shot.
I don't think he's going to be taken too credibly.
Bernie Sanders is a socialist, for God's sakes.
A thick Brooklyn accent.
He's 73 years old. He looks 91.
Is there a little crusty?
He's a loon, isn't he?
He owns a VHS copy of Tootsie.
Had you seen that from The Daily Show?
No.
Are you feeling a little vindicated, though, knowing that people were in a way mocking your candidacy initially?
I don't want to hurt, the punditry, but sometimes, especially the inside the Beltway pundits, really don't know what's going on in the rest of the world. I've been going around the country, and we talk to a whole lot of people, and there's a lot more frustration and anger than the inside the Beltway people perceive.
Let's talk about some of the issues. The Patriot Act, the provision in the Patriot Act that allows the NSA to collect phone records and view the data, as you well know, was allowed to expire last night. You and Rand Paul seem to be on the same page when it comes to letting this expire. Why?
Well, in many respects, we are. I voted for to allow the debate to continue. But here's where we're at, Katie. This is a huge issue which we don't discuss enough. And it's not just the Patriot Act, which, among other things, will collect and file every phone call that you make. We also think there's reason to believe that occasionally they're getting into people's emails, getting into people's websites. Everybody agrees that our government has got to do everything that it can to protect the American people from the very, very serious threat of terrorism. That's a real threat. Question is, can we do it in a way that does not undermine the constitutional rights of the free people and our privacy rights? And I believe that we can. So I voted against the Patriot Act. I voted against the reauthorization of the Patriot Act, and I will vote against final passage for the current legislation because I think it does not go far enough.
The USA Freedom Act?
Yeah, I'll vote against that.
So why?
Because it doesn't go far enough in protecting our privacy rights. Now, the good news is it takes the phone records out of the NSA.
And gives it back to the phone companies,
yes,
right?
Correct. And that's a good thing. But the bad thing is there are still too many opportunities for the government to be tallying and collecting information on innocent people.
Too easy for the government
Yes.
to obtain those
Yes.
records?
Yes.
So what safeguards do you think should be in place for you to support this kind
This
of
is what we
legislation?
need. Look, I think everybody agrees that if the government or law enforcement has reason to believe that somebody may be involved in terrorist activity, we want all the investigation that we possibly can, obviously. But what we don't want is the government investigating or compiling records on people who really have nothing to do with terrorism. So in other words, if the government goes into what we call the FISA court and says, look, we think Catie Couric is involved, she's been doing this, she's been doing that, go after her. But if people are not involved and there's no evidence that they are, I don't want to see that information being collected.
But under this Freedom Act, doesn't the NSA or the government have to go to a FISA court and say, we
Yes.
need to obtain these records?
Yeah,
So
but
why
it's
is
not
that-
just the phone records, Katie. That's the point. Yes, you're right for the phone records, but it goes beyond that. There is other ways that the government can get information. And by the way, let me say this. This is not just the government. It is corporate America as well. What is very clear is technology has significantly outpaced public policy. So probably there is somebody who knows exactly where you are right at this moment. There's somebody who knows the food that you eat if you use a credit card when you go to the grocery store, the books that you purchase, the magazines that you buy. There is a huge amount of information being collected on our individual lives. We need to have a discussion about whether we're feeling good about that.
So what kind of legislation would you support that allows the government to keep track legitimately of potential terrorists?
If we have evidence that somebody is involved or might be involved in terrorist activity, let's go after them. But clearly, in terms of telephone records, 99.99% of the people whose records are being collected have nothing to do with terrorism.
So you don't think that you're going to make it too hard for the government to monitor these kinds of situations?
No, I honestly believe that we will give the government and law enforcement all of the resources that it needs to go after those people who we have to go after. But I really worry, that we are moving toward an Orwellian form of society where Big Brother, whether in the corporate world or in the government, has too much information about the private lives of innocent people.
Have you talked to Rand Paul about this, since you guys seem to be so like-minded on this issue?
Briefly, not a whole lot, but we have, yeah.
Would you agree, though, that you're pretty much in lockstep?
I wouldn't say lockstep, but we both have the same concerns.
All right, we're going to talk about some other issues, Senator, but first let me ask you about some broader issues about the campaign itself. Hillary Clinton is the clear front runner right now. Can you envision any scenario under which she would not get the Democratic nomination?
Yes. I think we can defeat her. I mean, that's why I'm in this race. We're in this race to win. I think that there are millions and millions of people who are tired of establishment politics, who are tired of corporate greed, who want a candidate that will help lead a mass movement in this country of millions of people who essentially say, what people are saying is enough is enough. The billionaire class cannot have it all.
So are you equating Hillary Clinton with establishment politics and corporate greed?
No, unless American people make that decision. I've known Hillary Clinton for 25 years and I have a lot of respect for her. But what I am saying is that the American people understand that when you have an economy where 99% of all new income goes to the top 1%, and where the top 1/10 of 1% owns almost as much wealth as the bottom 90%, where one family, the Walton family itself, owns more wealth than the bottom 130 million Americans, that is not an economy that America is supposed to have. That's not what we are about. And people want change. They want the wealthy and the powerful to start paying their fair share of taxes, among many other things.
So are you saying that Hillary Clinton is not, ergo, the candidate of change, Senator?
I will let, what I don't want to do, Katie, is people will make their own judgments about Hillary Clinton.
But you're running against her, so can you differentiate why you're the right candidate and she's not?
Yes, because for 30 years, as mayor of the city of Burlington, as a member of Congress, as a member of the Senate, I have stood up to the most powerful people, the most powerful special interest in this country. I took on Wall Street, and I am fighting to see that we break up the large financial institutions. I took on the insurance companies. I've taken on the drug companies. I've taken on the military-industrial complex. I am fighting to make sure that every kid in this country, regardless of his or her income, can afford to go to college.
I know that you've said that banks that are too big to fail should not exist.
Exactly.
Do you think that Hillary Clinton is too cozy with Wall Street? In other words, do you disagree with her on that particular point?
I think, which I don't know how much she has spoken out of it. What I believe is that given the greed and recklessness and illegal behavior on Wall Street, where you have 6 financial institutions that have assets that are the equivalent of 60% of the gross domestic product of this country, who have caused the worst recession in the modern history of this country. Many of these banks are bigger today than they were before we bailed them out. Enough is enough. Yes, we should break them up. I'm not quite clear what Hillary Clinton's position is on that issue.
You've also harshly criticized super PACs. Hillary Clinton's campaign has said that they hope to raise $2 billion, billion with a B.
That's right.
That way. Now, for some people who are watching, Senator, and may not be familiar with super PACs, why don't you explain what they are and why you find them so sinister?
Katie, as a result of the disastrous Supreme Court decision on Citizens United, what the Supreme Court essentially said to the wealthiest people in this country, you own much of the economy, now we're going to let you buy the United States government. That's what they said. They said campaign contributions are a form of freedom of speech. Now you can use your freedom to buy the United States government. You can spend as much money as you want on the political process. Now, previous to that, we had legislation that said you want to make a campaign contribution, there's a limit, roughly $5,400 that you can give to a candidate, $2,500 before, $2,500 after the primary. Not now. If you want to put millions of dollars, when Jeb Bush is going around the country, there are people who are putting millions of dollars into a super PAC, and that super PAC, theoretically independent of the candidacy, can then spend as much money as it wants.
On issue-oriented things.
Quote unquote issue-oriented, yes. They could do these vicious personal attacks. So it is a campaign finance system where the Koch brothers themselves, second wealthiest family in this country, will spend close to $1 billion this election cycle, which is more money, Katie, than either the Democratic Party or the Republican Party will spend. One family. Does that sound like democracy to you?
You're refusing to use super PACs, as I mentioned. Your average campaign donor, I guess, is paying an average of $42 per donor. You want to raise $50 million. But with all due respect, Senator, how do you compete when Senator Clinton is saying, we're going to raise $2 billion?
Katie, that is an excellent question. And we're just going to do the best we can. But what you're really saying, because it's not just Bernie Sanders, what you are really saying, as I hear it, can any candidate who is not tied in with the billionaires, who is trying to represent working families, who is trying to deal with the tough issues facing our country, can they run for office anymore? And if what you're saying is true, and it may well be true, frankly, let me be honest with you, it may in fact be too late. The billionaires may be too powerful, and maybe the only candidates who can win get money from the billionaires and are beholden to the billionaires. And if that's the case, you can form your judgment. But it doesn't sound to me like the democracy that men and women fought and died to defend.
You want to get big money out of politics. So how do you do it? How do you change the system?
Okay, good question. Excellent question. And boy, do we need a big national debate on this. All right, number one, first thing you do is overturn this disastrous Citizens United Supreme Court decision.
You want a constitutional amendment?
Absolutely. It passed by a 5-4 vote. And it is, in my view, resulting in the undermining of American democracy. Number two, temporarily, what we can do is pass a disclosure act. And what that means is if somebody wants to spend a whole lot of money on ugly 30-second ads, you can have their pretty picture up there on that ad saying, I approve that ad. And you know what? Maybe the Koch brothers do not want their pretty picture up there because they have to sell their products. Third thing we have to do is move toward public funding of elections. And that means that anybody in this country, if you're conservative, if you're progressive, can run for office, be on a level playing field, and not have to be dependent on a big money interest or spend half your life trying to raise money.
Do you think there's a national will to have public funding?
I do. Now, I know my Republican friends will talk about, this is welfare for politicians, public money for politicians. Yet the alternative is what we are seeing right now is a Republican Party and too many Democrats who are receiving huge amounts of money from big money interests and end up representing those people rather than the middle class.
I want to read a quote by Hillary Clinton. She said, we need to fix our dysfunctional political system and get unaccountable money out of it once and for all, even if it takes a constitutional amendment. Do you find that hypocritical after saying that you want to raise $2 billion through super PACs?
Well, let me just say this. I have said that I will not nominate a Supreme Court justice unless that nominee makes it very clear to the public that he or she will vote to overturn Citizens United. In terms of whether Secretary Clinton is hypocritical, I'll let other people make that decision. But I am not. I don't have a super PAC. I don't want a super PAC. And that's that.
It seems you're very hesitant to criticize her.
I'll tell you why. It's not that I'm hesitant to criticize her. I want a vigorous debate on the issues. What I think the American people, I've known Hillary.
But if she disagrees with you on the issues, why don't you say so?
Okay. What is her point on this issue? You tell me.
I think that she wants reform, and yet she doesn't feel the same way about as you do about funding.
Again, what I don't want campaigns to be about is soap operas and personal attacks. This is my view. I think Citizens United is an absolute disaster. I personally will not support any super PAC. I want to move toward public funding of elections. That's my view. The Secretary will give the public her view.
Let's talk about some other issues if we could. We got a lot to go through, so hopefully we can do it pretty quickly. Income inequality, okay, that has become those are the big buzzwords for this campaign. It's been a huge talking point. And you said you'd consider taxing the wealthiest 1% of Americans as much as 90%.
No, I didn't.
No, is that not true?
Things, no, it's not true. I mean, that's one of these things that seems to be circulating.
Okay, then why don't you clarify it?
Sure. Well, we haven't come up with a formal tax proposal, but this is what I will tell you. Number one, what we have come up with is legislation which says to corporations who are stashing their money in the Cayman Islands and Bermuda and other tax havens, costing us over $100 billion a year. Now I'm going to end that. We have large profitable corporations, Katie, that are not paying a nickel in federal income tax now. That's totally absurd. What we will do also is impose a stock transfer fee on Wall Street speculation, which can raise a very substantial amount of money. I certainly am in favor of that. Also, will we raise the individual tax rate for the wealthy? Absolutely. But we haven't come up with a number yet. The 90% you're referring to, you know when that existed?
Under Dwight D. Eisenhower.
Under that great communist Dwight David Eisenhower, a good Republican. So I don't know how high we will go, and that's something literally we're working on right now.
You know, that's a way of socking it to the rich and to corporations. Yes. But what about helping up and raising up the poor and building the middle class? I think not only is there this huge gap and this income inequality, but the lack of upward mobility now in this country is also a serious problem. Absolutely. So what do you do about that?
Good. All right, excellent. And you're absolutely right. This is what we've got to do. First of all, real unemployment in this country is not 5.4%. That's the official unemployment. If you include those people who have given up looking for work.
Or who are underemployed.
Exactly. You know what the real number is? It's 11%, close to 11%.
At one point it was 17%.
Yes, you're right. It's gone down. That's exactly right. Youth unemployment, 17%. African-American youth unemployment off the charts. What do we need? We need a major federal jobs program to put people back to work. And that should be about rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our rail system, airports, water systems, wastewater plants. You do that, I've proposed spending $1 trillion would create 13 million jobs over a 5-year period. Number two, you raise the minimum wage to a living wage, not $7.25 an hour, but $15 an hour over a period of a few years. Number three, pay equity for women workers. Women should not be making 78 cents on the dollar compared to men. Number four, we have everybody in America, if you're a worker, getting paid sick leave, and we also have to move toward paid vacation time. On top of all of that, one of the real tragedies of our moment is that we have hundreds of thousands of young people in this country at a moment when we are living in a highly competitive global economy who cannot afford to go to college, and you got millions more who are graduating deeply in debt. This has got to be dealt with.
In fact, I know that you've introduced legislation to make college tuition free at public universities.
Public colleges and universities.
Across the country. But how do you pay for that?
I'll tell you how you pay for it. You pay for it exactly what I said a moment ago, on a tax on Wall Street speculation. Right now, there is huge amounts of speculation going on Wall Street, a whole lot of stock transfer. We can raise something like $300 billion a year and also have the additional impact of putting a damper on that speculation. The people of this country bailed out Wall Street. Now it is time for Wall Street to start helping the middle class of this country. In terms of student debt, you literally have millions of people, no longer young people, middle-aged people, who who are paying 7, 8, 9% on their student debt. That is pretty crazy. So if we want to be competitive in the global economy, we do need to go back to where we were 45, 50 years ago. Do you know how much it cost to go to the City University of New York 50 years ago? It was free. University of California, free. Today, unaffordable. So I don't know if I'm a conservative or a progressive, but I want to go back to those days.
You know, a lot of people say you've got these big ideas, but there's just no way that you've outlined how to get them through a gridlock, hopelessly, some would say, gridlock Congress.
Nope.
You're shaking your finger.
I have outlined it. And I'll tell you
ahead.
how we do it. And this is where I should tell you, I respect and personally like the President of the United States very much. He's a friend. And I think history will record him having done a heck of a lot better job than his contemporaries feel. But this is one area where I disagree with Barack Obama. As you remember, in 2008, Obama ran a brilliant campaign, one of the great campaigns in American history. He galvanized the American people, brought young people together, created an enormous amount of excitement. The mistake that he made is the day after he was inaugurated, in my view. He might not agree with it, but I think it's accurate. He said, "Thank you very much for helping me get elected. I'll take it from here." I could sit down with John Boehner, and I could sit down with Mitch McConnell, and I could sit down with the Republicans. We're going to negotiate, and we're going to work it out. Well, guess what? From day one, they never wanted to negotiate. My view is that the only way we can bring about an agenda that works for working families is when millions of people are actively involved in the political process. If 1 million young people march on Washington, and they say to the Republican leadership, "We know what's going on, and you'd better vote to deal with student debt. You'd better vote to make public universities and colleges tuition free," that's when it will happen. We're already seeing that with the minimum wage. You know why minimum wage is going up around the country? Because workers are going out into the street. So we need a political revolution, in my view, where people begin to stand up and fight and take on the big money interest. If we don't have that, no president, not the best president in the world, will ever be able to accomplish anything. Because the powers in Washington are just, they have too much money and they're just too powerful.
You want to expand Social Security,
Yes.
but recently Chris Christie has talked about means testing
Yes.
for Social Security recipients and raising the age of eligibility from 65 to 69. So you're talking about expanding Social
Yes.
Security, and I know you don't believe that it's in trouble. You've said that before, the
Here's
Social
the fact.
Security. Go ahead.
It's not a debate. Yes, Jeb Bush recently came out with more or less the same idea as Chris Christie. Here's the fact. Social Security has over $2.5 trillion in the trust fund. No one debates this. It can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 18 years.
But as the population ages and fewer young workers are contributing to the system, it's not going to be a problem in your view?
Well, we got 18 years, so it's not in crisis right now. And the other dishonesty that's out there is it's causing a deficit problem, which it's not. Obviously, it's paid independently by the payroll tax.
But what do you think of means testing?
Well, I don't. I think it should be a universal system. When you talk to these guys, it's not just billionaires they don't want on the system. What they, something, it may be coming down to $40,000 or $50,000 a year to start cutting benefits. Here's my view. If you want to make Social Security, and I've introduced legislation to do this, if you want to extend the life of Social Security for decades and to expand benefits, you know what you do? Right now, person A is making $10 million a year. Person B is making $118,000 a year. Both of them are paying the same exact amount of money into the Social Security Trust Fund. Lift that cap, and you don't even have to start at 118. Start at 250,000. You will have enough money to extend Social Security for decades and also expand benefits. There are many people in this country, Katie. We don't know. A lot of people don't know this. You had elderly people trying to get by on $12,000, $13,000 a year. In my view, we need to expand benefits. Now that Jeb Bush or Chris Christie or all these Republicans representing billionaires, they come forward and they say to working people, you're going to have to work to 67, 68, 70 years of age. I think that is very cruel, and I think it's unnecessary, and I will vigorously oppose that.
Let's talk about foreign policy if we could. I know that you've said the U.S. should not lead the fight against the Islamic State. So how would you, if you were president, combat the growing threat of ISIS?
And it certainly is a growing threat, and this is a barbaric organization. All right, you're looking at a guy who voted against the first Gulf War, who not only voted against the war in Iraq, but I recently saw a speech that I gave on YouTube. And I have to tell you, much of what I said way back then turned out, unfortunately, to be right. Where we are right now is you have a region with Saudi Arabia, with Turkey, with Jordan. You have a number of countries controlled by very wealthy families who are asking the United States to take the lead. Saudi Arabia has the third largest defense budget in the world. Why aren't their troops? And they're much more powerful military than ISIS. Why aren't they in there? My point is that if it is the United States versus ISIS, we become a propaganda, it becomes real propaganda for ISIS. Saying, here is this Western country, here is this Christian country, rally behind ISIS. What's going on there is a war for the soul of Islam. And those people who believe in the truth about Islam, who are not, crazy people, destructive people, they're going to have to come, they're going to have to get their hands dirty in this. They're going to have to stand up and fight. The United States should be supportive, along with other countries. But we cannot and should not be involved in perpetual warfare in the Middle East. The Muslim countries themselves have got to lead the effort. We should be supportive. Other countries should be supportive.
The vote on Iraq, whether it's Hillary Clinton saying who authorized it, saying I made a mistake, or Jeb Bush kind of talking about it and getting himself into some political hot water, seems to be re-emerging. Do you think that should matter?
Yeah, it does, in this sense. It's a question of judgment. Hillary Clinton had the same information I expect that I had. I did not believe Dick Cheney. I did not believe Don Rumsfeld. I did not believe the analysis that President Bush made. I said, I don't think that makes sense to me. I voted no. Other people voted yes. But you could take that argument in other ways. I voted against the deregulation of Wall Street. Bill Clinton said, it's a great idea, and many of the Democrats said, it is a great idea. Let's merge the commercial banks with the insurance companies, and this will really be good. I never bought that for 1 second. In fact, I had an interchange with Alan Greenspan where I kind of told him, you have this kind of concentration, it's going to lead to bad things. So what it is it's not just the war, it's a question of judgment and analyzing data.
Let me ask about race relations, if I could, Senator. During the last year, we've seen explosions of violence in cities all across the country and a growing distrust between police departments, predominantly white police departments, and the minority communities they serve. How do you fix that?
Very important issue. And let me respond in this way. First of all, I think we need to change the tone of police-community relations. I was a mayor for 8 years. And what we instituted in Burlington, Vermont is a concept called community policing, where the police officers become part of the community and not seen as somebody from the outside coming in. And I believe in that. And the police officers should look like the community to the degree that can happen. Second of all, like any public official, if a police officer, and by the way, as a former mayor, I do know how hard police officers work, and the vast majority of them do a very good job, and they live under incredible stress. It is not easy to be a cop. But there are cops who do not do a good job, who act absolutely inappropriately. We have seen that recently. And if a police officer acts inappropriately, that police officer must be held accountable. And I have been impressed by areas like South Carolina, for example, when they saw the evidence of a police officer shooting somebody in the back. They indicted that police officer, and that's what should happen. Third point, we have got to demilitarize the police. You don't need tanks. You don't need heavy military equipment in the communities of the United States of America. Fourth issue. In Ferguson, Missouri, black youth unemployment is somewhere around 50%. And every police officer in America can have a Harvard Law degree, but you're not going to solve problems when there is so little hope, when there is so much unrest, when young people see no future for them. We got to pay attention to the African American communities, to poverty in America in general, make sure that these kids get the education and the job training that they need.
In an article on Mother Jones last week, someone was quoted as saying you described yourself as, quote, the only person who did not get high in the 60s when you moved to Vermont. Is that true? And if so, why not?
Because I coughed a lot. I don't know. I smoked, I was sitting around and I smoked marijuana. I smoked marijuana twice, didn't quite work for me.
And how do you feel about the legalization of marijuana for recreational use? Yeah. Because I've read some comments that you've made, and it sounds as if you're conflicted about it.
Here's what it is. It's not my thing, but it is the thing of a whole lot of people. And if you want to make the argument that maybe marijuana is less harmful to health than tobacco, I think you'd probably be making a correct argument. Some may disagree, but I think it's probably true.
But you said there's two sides to the story.
Right. And yet, if you talk to law enforcement folks, what they worry about is they see this as an entry-level drug, which leads to coke, which leads to heroin, and so forth.
A gateway drug, yeah.
Gateway drug, right. And those are the two sides. So what I can tell you is this. We have far, far, far too many people in jail for nonviolent crimes. And I think in many ways, the war against drugs has not been successful. And I think we got to rethink that. When I was mayor of the city of Burlington, which has a large university, and one or two of the kids were smoking marijuana, we suspect, we didn't arrest too many people for marijuana. Colorado, some other states are have legalized it. In Vermont, we decriminalized it. I want to take a look at how that is going before I make a final opinion.
Speaking of Mother Jones, that same article contained an essay you wrote, which I know you've talked about. You were on Meet the Press yesterday morning. You wrote it in 1972 called Man and Woman. And it included this line, Senator, quote, "A woman enjoys intercourse with her man as she fantasizes about being raped by three men simultaneously." Now, you said this was bad fiction. You compared it to 50 Shades of Grey. But can you understand how kind of disturbing that sounds?
Right. First of all, it was a terribly written article 43 years ago. And I don't know what you wrote 43 years ago, but this one was a pretty bad article. Second of all, if you read the whole article, you know what the article is talking about? But the article, piece of fiction, is saying that we live in a culture in which, through culturalization, some men have to be dominant. And we live in a culture which takes you to 50 Shades of Grey, where some women feel comfortable being submissive. And the argument was, this is not good, that we want people to be equal and independent. That was the thrust of the article. And let me also say, you're looking at a guy who has as strong a voting record on women's rights as any member of the United States Congress. And I've been endorsed and supported by women's groups throughout my political career.
You wrote it when you were 30 years old, back in 1972. Can you imagine if you were 30 today writing that piece, given how really the conversation has changed so dramatically?
Well, yes. And again, it was a terribly written article. But the essence of that article was to say that we want to live in a society not where some men feel the need to be dominant and other women feel the need to be submissive. That was what that article was about. Poorly written, but that's what it meant to say.
Do you regret writing it?
Sure I did. But by the way, it was written in the alternative Vermont newspaper or magazine. I suspect about 14 people read. Yes, it was.
Now a lot more people have read
Now,
that
see
essay.
that? Now, here's the word to anyone who wants to run for president of the United States. Understand that anything that you wrote 40 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago, it will be out there. But yeah, so of course I regret writing it. It was a terribly written article. But there are very few people in the Congress who have stronger voting records than I do on behalf of women's rights.
We've got some questions from Twitter, and then I know we've got to wrap things up. You have to go soon. But one question was from Sky River 53, and it was, quote, "What is your quick definition of socialism, and how far would you desire to take this in changing the United
Excellent.
States?"
Fair question. I am a democratic socialist, which means that I look to countries like Denmark, Finland, Norway, Sweden, European countries that have had social democratic governments, labor governments. And in many of these countries, Katie, what you have, as you well know, is you have free health care for all of the people as a right. Health care, which is more cost effective, by the way, per capita than it is in the United States. Do you know how much college education costs in Denmark? Cost in Finland? It's zero. It's not anything at all. Strong child care systems. So when parents go to work, they know the kids are getting quality child care. Stronger retirement benefits. By and large, while these countries all have their problems, their governments do a lot better job representing the middle class of their countries than our government does, which is heavily dominated by big money interests.
Senator John McCain was 72 when he ran for president back in 2008. And I'm sure, as you remember, a lot of people really questioned his ability to deal with the very grueling and taxing aspects of being president of the United States. You're 73 years old. So how do you tell people, hey, I could handle this job?
Katie, I'm trying to think the last time I took a day off being sick. I cannot. I mean, this is not wood, but if it was wood, I would knock on it.
Well, there's wood underneath
All
the
right,
plastic, so.
You know, thank God I've been blessed with good health and good endurance. I used to be a long-distance runner when I was a kid. So I am strong and I am healthy, and I would not be running for office if I did not think I could do this job 100% well.
Right now, there are 9 Republican candidates,
I think
declared
19,
candidates,
I think.
and counting,
Yeah.
and counting.
Yep.
What do you think of the Republican field?
Here's what has happened over the years is the Republican Party has moved from the party of Dwight David Eisenhower, kind of moderate conservatives, to a right-wing extremist party. And this is the agenda. I'm the ranking member of the Budget Committee. And let me tell you what the Republican budget is about, voted for by almost every Republican. Huge tax breaks for billionaires, cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, education, and nutrition programs. Unfortunately, the Republican Party has now become a tool of the Koch brothers and other very, very wealthy special interests. They do not even believe in the reality of climate change. The entire scientific community, with few exceptions, telling us that climate change is real, already causing devastating problems and caused by human activity. They reject the science because their moneyed folks says, hey, we're making a lot of money off of fossil fuel. I think that's pretty scary when you have a major political party rejecting science.
Having said that, doesn't any president, senator have to kind of learn and understand the art of compromise between these two very often polarized groups of individuals?
The answer is yes, and you're looking at somebody who was a mayor, a congressman, and a senator who did just that. If you look back in the last dysfunctional congressional session, I think many observers will tell you that maybe the major piece of legislation to be passed was a comprehensive veterans health care bill, which I worked on, by the way, with John McCain and with Republicans in the House. It was very much a bipartisan piece of legislation. I helped author that. Throughout my career, when appropriate, I have worked with Republicans to bring things to fruition.
Do you think that a lot of Republicans, though, I mean, you know, when it comes to compromising in general, they look at you and say, Bernie Sanders, no way, Jose, he is just too far left for us to even...
They are saying that.
Yeah.
These people who want to cut Social Security, cut Medicare, cut Medicaid, and give tax breaks to billionaires at the time we have more income and wealth inequality, who reject science, who like a campaign finance system that allows billionaires to buy elections, they are telling the American people that I am too extreme. Sorry, don't buy it.
So we thought we'd end this because I know you have to go on a sort of a fun note. I noticed that when you answer questions, you often answer them with a question. And someone else noticed that recently as well. I don't know if you saw this last night, but let's take a look.
Okay. Do you know what the unemployment rate there is?
It's extremely high.
Do you know how much it costs to go to college in Denmark? How much does it cost? Do you know? Do you know what their agenda is? Do you know what they believe in? Do you know how the VA was processing claims? Do you know how many factories we have lost in the last 10 years? Do you know what's going on in Nicaragua? What's going on in Panama? Do you know what the bottom 60% own? Do you know what the bad news is? You know what you have to do? Do you know what? You know what? Well, you know what? You know what? I got a pain in my stomach and I'm worried.
We'd like to thank John Oliver and his team for that. But, you know, they've said that anyone who really wants to, you've said rather, not they, that anybody who really wants to be president who wakes up with a burning desire is a little bit crazy.
Absolutely.
So are you a little bit crazy?
Yeah, I suppose so. I mean, it's not, look, I am running for office. My political history is the most unusual of any member of the Congress. You're looking at a guy who ran statewide and got 1% of the vote, okay? Last time around, I got 71% of the vote. I do not wake up. I'm very proud to be Vermont's senator, and I do not wake up in the morning and say, oh, I've got to be president of the United States. But what I do look at is a country in deep, deep trouble, a country which is increasingly dominated by wealthy and powerful forces. And I think we've got to fight back and make our government and our country work for all the people and not just a handful.
Do you think ultimately one of your goals may be to push Hillary Clinton a little more to the left, to push her in a more progressive direction on a number of issues? No.
My goal is to win this election.
Would you be interested in being her vice president?
Would she be interested in being my vice president? We'll talk about it. But the point is, the way you win elections, Katie, is by raising the issues that the American people think make sense. And I think we are doing that. Why we will be outspent, but I think we got a good shot to win this thing.
Well, Senator Bernie Sanders, thanks so much for coming by. I really appreciate it. Good to see you again, Senator. And it's nice to be able to have a more extended interview, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And there were a lot of questions I didn't have time to ask you, so maybe you'll come back.
I'd be happy to.
Appreciate it. And this has been a Yahoo News live stream. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you later.